Viewers, you are welcome to the program Nigeria Decides 2023 Issues and Voices. This is a program that's being conducted by the Working Group on Peace Building and Governance. It's one of the big NGOs playing in the arena of how to get Nigeria to stabilize its democracy. Among its members are the Sultan of Sokoto and Cardinal Onaikan of the Catholic Church. We also have on this panel two of us who are members. And what we are doing in the run-up to the elections, with support from the United States Institute of Peace, is to engage in discussions and conversations on key issues that will lead us to where we want to be, credible elections in 2023. What are the issues? What are the voices saying? And what's the state of analysis? Above all, the stakeholders, the actors, what are they doing? What are the problems with what they are doing? What are the good things that they need to be doing? These are the issues we'll be discussing in the program over the next couple of months till we get to the election. Our theme today is political parties, internal democracy, and credible elections in 2023. And we have with us two guests that are specialists, engaged individuals, technical experts that will lead us through this conversation. One of them you may have heard about is Atahiru Jega, who is a professor of political science in Bayero University, Kano. He is also a member of the National Working Group. Our second guest tonight is Professor Sam Egu. Sam Egu is the resident electoral commissioner for Niger State. He is also a professor of political science at the University of Jos and has been one of the leading experts in the field of political parties and democracy. Gentlemen, you are welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having us on this
Thank you, Jibo.
Professor Jega, let's start from you. Maybe we start with the most simple. What's the role of political parties in a democratic system?
Thank you very much, Jibo. I think the simple answer is that in liberal democratic context, or what is called representative democracy, political parties are supposed to be vehicles through which candidates are identified and fielded to contest for elections. The idea is that in the modern context, societies have become so large and complicated that it is no longer possible to practice what is called direct democracy, in which all eligible people will meet together to take charge of their affairs. So running the state and the governance structures and the institutions would require representatives of the people. And these representatives, whether for lawmaking in the legislature or for the actual running of government affairs through politics, need to be elected. So political parties are supposed to aggregate interests to get people who believe in certain ideas to come together under that platform, and then political parties will select and recruit those that can best articulate their vision and their ideas or ideology, and then field them in the electoral arena so that they can compete with other members of other political parties for people to now choose from amongst all the options in terms of who their representatives could be, either elected into the executive organs of government or into the legislative organs of government. So basically that is the role of political parties. Interest aggregation, interest articulation, and then representation in the process of governance or legislation making.
Thank you very much for setting the stage in terms of the role political parties play in liberal democracy. Professor Egu, maybe you could talk to us a bit about, we've now had the theory, what has been the practice in Nigeria? How have political parties been playing this role? Are we happy with the way they are playing it? Are there challenges we want to highlight before we go deeper into the discussion?
Well, let me first make this confession that it can be very disheartening if you go back to how political parties have behaved since we returned to this democracy in 1999. Parties have not been democratic institutions that they are expected to be. They have not been accountable to their members, and they are not run even by the formal executive that they elect to run the affairs of parties from time to time. But you then sit back and look at what political parties are globally. I think there's a major decline in terms of the performance of political parties as institutions of democracy globally. I cannot, fail to recall the very interesting book that Tom Carothers published in 2008, where he highlighted what he calls the standard lamentations of political parties. And these lamentations are shared across both mature and emerging democracies, but they are certainly worse in our own context. And I think that's why we cannot just pretend that parties are the kind of institutions they used to be. 50 years ago, there's a major decline. In our own context, the level of irresponsibility exhibited by parties takes, the crisis to a different level. And if you read the literature and the public commentaries of people since 1999, they've identified a number of pathologies of political parties. But I think the one that stands out most visibly and very disturbing, in terms of serving as the institutional foundation for building a strong democracy, is the fact that parties are badly governed. And that highlights the central problem of internal democracy. My sense of it would be that if political parties aspire to govern society, it should be taken for granted that parties themselves must be effectively governed, before they can even think of governing the entire society. But what we have found out, and I think that is part of the peculiar challenge that we need to address over time, and that is that parties are founded by people who have money. Parties are founded by people who can invest in and therefore take major decisions about how parties are run, including determining the selection of party leaders. Because when we are talking about internal democracy, that is one important pillar of internal democracy. The fact that it is expected that party members voluntarily will assemble, and in choosing their leaders, pick one of them that is most capable of running the affairs of the party. In that regard, the fact that people who invest in party, who become party godfathers and gatekeepers, do not even allow that process. In the same way, you also find out of all the institutions in a democracy, there is no one apart from parties that has the power to determine candidate selection. Again, the understanding is that a party has a clear program or what we call manifesto, which it promises to deliver on if elected into power. It therefore looks for the most competent among its members and then put them forward for purposes of election, either for legislative or executive positions. Again, the same interest, that we find in the logic of parties emerging also, prevails in terms of the selection of candidates. And I think this is the second core element of the problem of internal democracy. And as we have had it since 1999, it is such that because of the level of the development of citizens, and their ability in many cases, to punish parties that select wrong candidates, this has continued to prevail. Of course, we have seen one or two instances in which people, out of rebellion, vote against unpopular party candidates. But if it's a trend that you can strengthen, probably over time, parties will learn, to open that process, to democratic values and processes, so that, people can actually determine the best candidate for elective positions. So I think this is a major crisis. So parties lack internal democracy, and it has caused a number of problems, including the fact that some parties come, and then disappear all of a sudden because of the same problem of inability to govern effectively. You have seen defection. We have seen all kinds of things, So I think it's a major problem. And we all do know that if you want to measure the health of a democracy, you measure the health of political parties. And I think we should be very bothered in this country that parties are sick, organically sick, and they do not live up to their bidding, as represented as democratic institutions that can probably select the best. Because candidate recruitment, as Professor Jega said, is one of the major pillars of of what parties do to keep democracy alive.
Professor Jega, one of the many things you have done in your life is to run an organization called the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC. And in that job, you must have encountered political parties. He has painted a very disturbing picture of what one could call the underdevelopment of Nigerian political parties. What's your own view? Do you think that assessment is anywhere near the truth?
Definitely. Everything that Professor Sam Egu said, from my own reading of the nature and character of Nigerian political parties, as well as my own experience of relating with them while in INEC, really is correct. In fact, I think he has even been measured. What he has said basically scratches the surface of the terrible challenges that our political parties have. Remember, in the theoretical context, the idea of democracy is participation. And the whole idea is that political parties themselves should be democratic if they need to participate and add value to democracy in general in a national context. So in a situation where political parties are not democratic, where they are run by authoritarian dispositions rather than democratic dispositions, in fact, in a situation where the rules that the parties themselves develop to guide their own activities are more often than not breached than complied with, then obviously you cannot, undemocratic institutions and processes cannot add value to democratic development in the country. And I think that has been a major challenge of the role of political parties in Nigeria's democratization process. So you have a situation in which, as he rightly pointed out, a few people join together, mostly led by somebody who has money or who is said to be a godfather, and they establish a political party, And really, they are not interested in mobilizing people to join the party on the basis of certain ideals, and they do not pay attention to aggregate any interest apart from their own self-serving objectives in establishing that party. And obviously, they don't bother about mobilization, because I think underpinning their forming a political party is to win power by hook or by crook. And that kind of mentality and mindset obviously makes political parties not really valuable vehicles, of engaging in an electoral context that can bring about people who are genuine representatives of the people. And that's why in the way in which they engage with elections, in the way in which they engage with governance, clearly there is no focus in terms of addressing the needs and the aspirations of the citizens whom they claim to represent in elections. So I tell you a simple example. If you check all these political parties in Nigeria, very few, if any, have a credible membership register. A genuine political party is supposed to be driven by its membership base.
Yes.
And this membership base is supposed to also ensure that the members actually have a say in the way in which the party is run. So they don't pay attention to that because they believe that they can use money to get people to participate in elections, to actually steal votes or to pay for votes. So in that kind of context, many parties don't pay attention to membership. And in INEC, I know after the 2011 elections, when we began to realize the faulty foundations of Nigerian political parties, INEC offered to political parties that, look, you have to pay attention to having a strong organizational base, which means you must have professional, competent staff to run the administrative structures within political parties, and you also need to establish a database of your members. Even if your members are just paying 5 kobo, 10 kobo, or 1 naira as membership fees, if you have many members, it will still amount to a lot, and it will free you from having to depend and rely on one individual or a few individuals paying, undertaking the funding of the party and therefore manipulating the party because they are the ones who are funding it. And as much as INEC tried, political parties didn't consider it as a priority. INEC at that time even offered to do training and to provide the technical basis for establishing this membership databases, but really that didn't go far because political parties were not interested. So frankly, it's a very, very serious challenge. We need to recognize that unless we have political parties who realize that the essence of a political party is to stand for something on a sustainable basis and to be able to get other citizens who believe in that, call it ideology or philosophy of certain values, and then mobilize them to be members and then to select the best amongst them to contest in election, then for that long would you continue to have challenges with the way in which our country's democracy develops. So we really have to do a lot of work, to strengthen our political parties, to reposition them in such a manner that their engagement with politics will add value to governance as well as to democratic development in our country.
I think Professor Egu used a word when describing the book you are referring to, Lamentations on Political Parties. We have done a lot of lamentations on political parties now, and we have to move on. I think there's a point Professor Egu made that, well, the only way we know how to run democracy is with political parties. You also made the point in your opening remarks. Now we are already in the countdown to the 2023 elections. The parties are what they are. They've gone through nomination processes and they have candidates. and some interesting issues have arisen out of the nomination process. Now we are at the critical level of campaigning, what you called, Professor Jega, selling whatever they want to convince the people to them, so that they would be elected on the basis that people are convinced about their messaging on what they want power for. So jumping to where we are today, how are political parties doing that? What is the state of their campaign manifestos? Are they transmitting these messages to people? Are people able to differentiate what are the differing messages of the 18 political parties on offer?
Well, clearly, maybe out of the disorganization in which many of the parties are, they have been a bit late in even developing the party manifestos, because as we speak now, I think no more than 3 political parties have actually announced, either through their candidates or so, about what their manifesto is over which they are contesting the 2023 general elections. Now, it's not enough to have a manifesto. You also need to articulate it and use it to mobilize support for your candidates. So the manifestos are even coming too late in the day in terms of really being effective as mobilizational platform. But it's very, very important that these manifestos are articulated by the parties and the candidates, and are articulated in such a manner that citizens will understand what each party stands for and what each of their candidates stands for, so that the citizens can now have an informed basis of judging, if we vote this candidate or this party, what do they promise to do? But as well, how do we hold them to account if they get elected? Because in the Nigerian context, again, both parties and candidates, just if they use manifestos at all, use them just to engage in election. As soon as they win the election, they all seem to forget about the manifesto, and they run the government most likely based on, what do you call it? What is the word? You know, they run them from their heads, rather than from really the script they have offered. You know, so I think at this stage now, the challenge is on how credible civil society organizations can try to study whatever parties have offered as manifesto, even understand which parties have no manifesto whatsoever, and be able to enlighten citizens as voters as to where each party stands with regards to what it is offering to do. Because that then hopefully will get citizens as voters, when they go to elect those that are on offer, to make the right kinds of choices, and when eventually candidates are elected, to now hold both the parties of the candidates and the candidates themselves to account in terms of what they say they will do and whether they are doing it or not. So I think the major responsibility now is how, under the circumstances, as you put it, we can make the best use of what is happening, so that we can keep adding value to our democratic development. And I believe civil society organizations have a role. Maybe even community-based organizations have a significant role to play. And the other thing is to ensure that rules, both the electoral legal framework and the guidelines of INEC and other regulations are actually fully complied with. Because again, from our historical experiences, political parties quite often tend to not follow the rules as they engage with the electoral process.
Thank you, viewers. We'll take a short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back, viewers, to our discussions on political parties, internal party democracy, and credible elections. Professor Sam Egu, we, as I said earlier, already in the campaign for the 2023 elections. The candidates have emerged. They are out there beginning to campaign. And as Professor Jega said, the state of their preparedness in that is quite another question. But what do you think about how the candidates on offer in the 18 parties emerged? Are they the best possible ones? And what should citizens, voters, do as they look at the candidates on offer?
Yeah. Well, I think I will respond to that about 2 quick points. The first one is a point made by Professor Jega about what political parties do and the fact that they do them deliberately. You know, they will resist reform efforts, and even when, you know, they fulfill all righteousness by holding a convention or congress for purpose of selecting candidates, they end up even submitting a different name other than the one that people knew won. So it's a deliberate thing. You know, the second point is that Nigerian politics has remained essentially transactional in nature. You know, and I do not think we are on the eve of seeing politics of transformation in the real sense of the word, because the beginning point is not even the problems of the day. The beginning point for a political party that wants to take over power or to continue in power is to the one in power to say, this is how much fidelity we have kept to our party program and manifesto. And therefore, on the basis of this program, we have been able to move poverty, you know, from one level, or we have been able to create wealth. We have been able to create abundance. We have brought down the level of inflation. Employment figures has risen. I mean, I would want this to be the basis of conversation, you know, while rendering accountability for what you promised, you know, when you were elected, to say, this is the more reason you should continue to, you know, keep us in power. And for the opposition challenging, I want them to go to the fundamental structures of the Nigerian problem. But we don't find this. One time, not long ago, they asked a presidential candidate, one of the major parties, what will happen to the universities? He said, well, if I take over, I'll hand them over to state governments. And I said, this is a major issue. We've been on strike, and it's in the public domain. What are the root causes of this strike? Universities have been shut down. But you don't have that kind of answer that goes to the roots of the problem. Or just last week, another presidential candidate was put to question. When are we going to see your manifesto? You say, well, you are talking about manifesto. We have many good policies that are on the shelf. What we need to do is to dig them up. In any case, my manifesto will come out very soon. But I'll talk to 2 of the major constituencies to know what they want before we put up. So I think basically we are still doing transactional politics. And there is no conversation that stems from what political parties stand for. And then when you have problem of insecurity, rather than taking it as a partisan issue on which both opposition and ruling parties need to speak to how you can address them, everyone wants to make a political capital, you know, out of the problem. So I think at the end of the day, we need to go back to the whole question of how parties can be accountable to citizens of this country. And I think 2 important things that we need to do. One of them, Jega dealt with very robustly, and that is the role civil society has to play in holding parties to account. But the other one, I think, is also regulatory on the part of, you know, the Independent National Electoral Commission. Because as they are also campaigning, I think we need to put in place machineries for tracking what parties are saying, you know, whether they're engaging in hate speech, whether they are speaking to the issues, because this campaign has to be issue-driven, and that we need to measure performance of key political parties and probably come out with a report at the end of the day, even if it is for naming and shaming, to say party A in terms of public expectation, you fell short as follows. Because, and then begin to insist in terms of what, if parties are going to stand for election, we need to also use this report card, to be able to see those that eventually, in the eyes of the public, are doing what will advance our democracy. I think we need to play our role as regulators and really, police parties and track their activities and report to the public.
Yeah, that's really a very important issue. Sam, I want to remain with you for a bit. At this stage in the campaign, there's a lot of tension in the country. First of all, there's a general tension over violence, insecurity. There's religious tension. There's the so-called Muslim tickets. And people are concerned about this general atmosphere could impact negatively on the election and the outcome of the process. What's your view?
Well, there are two ways of looking at it. One way is to say, this is not the first time we have been here. In 2015, people thought the country would break into pieces. In 2019, we repeated the same thing. Elections came and went. Nigeria remains. It's only that the major problems have not been addressed. But I think what has happened is that the country has undergone a very negative transformation in terms of identity politics. When people talk in beer parlors, they said, well, in 1993, we had the Muslim tickets. It didn't cause any earthquake. But if you know, between 1993 and now, a lot of things have happened in terms of processes that have allowed identity politics to take a different dimension, in the context of poverty, in the context of people not sitting about tomorrow, including the meals they eat, in the context of anxiety over employment. Every little thing can become a big issue, And I think that we have a major problem, and that is why it is not enough to leave politicians to campaign, in terms of allowing market forces to take their way. And that's why we are very conscious about the structures we are building for intervening for purposes of peace, creating law, in terms of limit to campaigns and what have you. But I think that there are major problems in this country, and one of them is the failure of national unity. And the fact that virtually the elites and the politicians have even abandoned the unity project. Because everybody talks about what is for himself. The whole idea, we started, the founding fathers of this country, even from different ethnic backgrounds, even when the political parties were ethnic in nature, were agreed that there is a pan-Nigerian identity, a Nigerian nation that every ethnic group should subscribe to on the basis of certain things we are offering everybody. This has collapsed. Institutions were created to reinforce this unity. We have deliberately brought them down. And I think we need, in terms of what we are telling politicians to do, to also make commitments on issues of national unity, on issues of addressing major challenges of poverty and unemployment. Because if you do them and you do them very well, you are going to tone down identity, people's sense of their ethnicity, of their religion, and their understanding of who they are, and what they stand to gain. We are likely to, tamper with them. But if we do not deliberately speak to national unity, create structures to reinforce it, and commit politicians to also make pronouncements, as to the sanctity of national unity and national progress, then we are not going to go anywhere.
Professor Jega, do you want to add anything on the identity politics dimension?
Yes, I think as many keen observers of the Nigerian political space have argued, we have got into a situation in which more than ever before, religion, ethnicity, and other primordial identities have been weaponized, brought so much on the front burner of politics that all other issues, in fact pertinent issues that need to be addressed, are circumscribed by either religion or ethnicity. And I think it's a very unfortunate thing that our elite have allowed to happen to our politics. In fact, it's a very dangerous thing, and we need to begin to deploy ways and the means of de-emphasizing this negative mobilization of identities. Otherwise, really, it will be destructive not only of the aspirations of national unity, but even destructive of the viability of Nigeria as an entity. So this is something that needs to be focused upon. Unfortunately, the Nigerian elite, everybody is talking about it, seem to lack an enlightened self-interest. The bargaining, the elite bargaining process seems to be focused on self-serving objectives in terms of what do I get, not about how do we keep the country together so that as elite we continue to gain, even if that is your primary objective. You have to have a country before you can get your selfish interest, but they don't. They have that narrow horizon, and they all focus on here and now. What do I get now? And no country develops without a credible elite bargain that focuses on development and economic growth and addressing the fundamental needs of the people first and foremost, before you think about then how can elite continue to prosper as elite in a country. Nigeria really is deficient in terms of the capacity and the ability of the elite to develop that consensus and to do that elite bargain in the national interest rather than in their own selfish interest. So it's very, very important we begin to refocus this, because frankly, weaponizing religion, ethnicity and other primordial identities can only push this country aground and destroy the scope of Nigeria actualizing its potential as a strong, vibrant country and a shining example for other countries. So really I think it's a fundamental issue that needs to be addressed. Now, if our politicians...
If I could just stop you there, we'll take a short break. Viewers, we'll be right back. Okay, Professor Jega, you are talking about the importance of elite consensus in trying to map a way forward. If you could just conclude that.
Yes, I think statement. It's very, very important that our elite realize that they need an enlightened self-interest, that we all need Nigeria as a country to address our fundamental needs and aspirations collectively before we can begin to think of our own individualistic pursuits. And unfortunately, our leading elite in politics, maybe in the economy also, only tend to think and focus more in terms of what is in it for me here and now. Mm-hmm. And while they do that, they tend to weaponize ethnicity and religion and the other primordial sentiments of where does he come from and so on, for that individualistic, selfish pursuit. So we need to pay attention to developing an elite consensus on the most basic issues about Nigeria's survival as a country. And recently I had occasion to tell an audience that our country has degenerated so bad that the slogan that we used during the Civil War to keep this country one as a task that must be done is probably even pertinent now. Because one of the things we have to pay attention is how to ensure that we can keep this country as one and to keep it so that it can really discharge its obligations as state, the roles and responsibilities of a state under normal circumstances, and also do that with equity and justice for everybody who is a citizen in this country. We need to focus attention on that, and then we need to focus attention on also addressing the fundamental needs and the aspirations of our citizens. So if we can do that, then we can see that the best way to do this is to elect the best people into the governance sphere so that they can govern well, they can respect the law, operate by the law, and ensure justice and equity for all citizens. That is how you begin to revive respect by citizens to the government and the constituted authority, and that will then create the required atmosphere for this country to grow and to flourish. So it's a very, very important thing that Nigerian elite must take serious. And in the current context, obviously, again, civil society organization has a fundamental role to play. I think we are getting into a situation, very dangerous situation, in which while the elite lack enlightened self-interest, collective self-interest, and they are weaponizing religion and ethnicity, they are also dividing the civil society organizations by this mobilization of religion and ethnicity. And when that happens, then it means that you won't have sane, rational voices that are focused on the right kind of things to be done. So the civil society has to resist that negative encroachment in terms of what their civic duties and responsibilities are, in order to get citizens to remain focused on getting the best people through the electoral process to govern us. We have muddled through governance in this country for so long that really we need to recognize that muddling through is no longer an option. We have to begin to raise the bar, and the best way to raise the bar is to have good people, people with integrity elected, through the electoral process.
Professor Sam Egwu, like the suggestion by Professor Jega that we move back to the old slogan during the Civil War, to keep Nigeria one is a task that must be done. But how can we do this work in the era of social media, which can be very divisive, which can actually have the opposite impact in terms of mobilizing sentiments of division?
Well, when if I do a summary of what Professor Tairo Jega has said, it takes me to the inevitable conclusion that we are actually saddled with a homicidal ruling elite, and that the real task is how to save this elite from itself. But the problem is compounded, as you pointed out, by the social media. I think we need, when looking at the disruptive role, the way social media reinforces division, and how this can also, set in motion processes that can lead to collapse of society, is to go back to the whole question that citizens are angry. We go back to the same problem, because the national project has failed, because the state is not living up to responsibility. There are different notions of Nigerian nationhood, and there's a lot of contestation. So what I find on the social media is that contestation. Youth groups, for example, had a dream of what they thought Nigeria should be, which they are not seeing. And therefore, they have a rival. If this country then disappears from the surface of the earth, they have nothing to lose. So I think we need to go back to the basics and confront the problem, of national development. And if we do development, which I think is common sense, because the problems are known, where you should put the investment is clearly known. It is just that the allure of the elites, the tendency to take whatever exists into their pockets and forget the whole nation, is part of the problem. We are not doing the right investment in education, in industry, in manufacturing. So the only way we can also counter, the extremes of social media is to do development and bring people back to national consciousness. I think at the end of the day, you go back to the same problem.
Yeah, but are there ways of tempering the role of the social media?
Well, I think regulation, for me, would be one important way out. I know it is difficult to regulate, but at least you need to set limits to what people can see. And I think we need also to discuss about content, that we should put in the public. There is a limit. Because at the end of the day, there has to be a country first.
Yeah.
There has to be a country first. If you don't have a country, as I said, you can't even pursue your economic interests.
Yeah.
You can't trade from Maiduguri to Lagos. And yet, this country is so huge, so diverse, and that if we keep it well, everybody, we have enough for everybody's need, not for everybody's greed. Yeah.
Do you want to add anything on the social media, Professor Jega?
I certainly think that while the social media has opened up scope of expression and sharing of information on such a formidable scale than ever before, there are certainly other negative uses. And we have to keep on trying to find ways and the means of mitigating the negative uses of social media. Certainly regulation is one way to do it, although anytime somebody mentions regulation, people get afraid that the state may use it also to its own advantage, to begin to suppress voices, to begin to pass its own messages and underplay messages that are passed by others. But there is no doubt that the negative dimensions of the use of social media really have to be addressed. So regulation is one, but before the regulation, extensive discussions and consultations with stakeholders is necessary so that there is a common understanding of what the challenges are and some kind of consensus as to what kind of regulation would be useful and impactful. But certainly one way or the other, the negative uses of social media have to be addressed because they are compounding and complicated the challenges that we face as a nation.
Exactly.
And unless they are addressed, they will keep helping to tear the country apart rather than to unify it.
Thank you. Let's go to the last question, which is that elections is ultimately about choosing leadership. We have 18 parties that are contesting in this election, and that's the leaders, potential leaders on offer. Now, talk to Nigerian voters. Tell them what they should do as they consider which one of these candidates they want to elect as leader.
I think at this point, the advice will be for citizens to do what political parties should have done in the first place in fielding these candidates. Because the political parties should have had a rational criteria of selecting the kind of people that they would offer to citizens to elect into positions of responsibility. And it appears that political parties have not really used that criteria. So what should be the criteria for voting or selecting people who are on offer? I think we have to look at the personal integrity of the people that are on offer. If somebody lacks integrity and you give him responsibility of governance in a country such as Nigeria, he will not rule with integrity.
Yeah.
And if integrity consists so many things, honesty, trustworthiness, selflessness, these are very, very important issues. And if you look at the antecedents of a candidate on offer, and you find that you can't find all of these things, then obviously it's foolhardy to think that you can elect that person and entrust him or her with a responsibility. So citizens have to be enlightened sufficiently to realize that it is not enough for somebody to go on election day and give you money. You need to know who are the candidates on offer. And this does not apply only to the presidential candidates. It applies to all the candidates, including your local representative to the State House of Assembly, not to talk of your governor or your senator or your member of the House of Assembly. You have to look for people, who are honest, who are sincere, who are not thieves, because many local thieves are already known, and who, beyond selflessness, also have the fear of God, because in Nigeria we are also very religious people.
Yes.
So people really who in their antecedents lack all of this and are very greedy, are very selfish, you know,
shouldn't be considered.
there are people that you should never give a responsibility to. There are other things to also look at: the competence, the capacity, you know, the ability of a candidate, and the experience. Had he held prior responsibilities, even if they are not public government responsibilities, community responsibilities? You know, what was the performance? You know, so all these things need to come into our assessment of candidates when we come to vote. But we have to be enlightened. We have to keep an eye to understand all this, so that at the end of it, we do not just vote people because they are from my religion, or because they are from my ethnic group, or because the candidates have given me money. And sometimes people irrationally think that if you take money from a candidate, you are obligated to vote for him or her. No, you know, so ideally don't take the money. But even if you take the money, obviously let it not be the reason why you vote for a candidate.
Is that not dishonesty?
Yeah, it's dishonest. People say, unfortunately it's a mentality. I think on a scale, rational scale, even using all the religious tenets, you know, if somebody offers you money, you know, and you choose to take it, that should not bound you if you know that person
Absolutely.
cannot hold the responsibility that he's looking for.
We've just one more minute, so do you want to add advice to citizens as they prepare to vote?
Well, I
Should
think
they select?
I think
elect?
the first one is to encourage them to come out and vote. Very important, in their large numbers, believing that their votes can change their life. And secondly, to motivate them to vote is not enough, but to also address their minds to what should guide them. And my point really is that you need a lot of public education, particularly at local level, because what is going to determine election outcome in this country is not the individual judgment of voters. It's a lot of it will come from elite pacting and what they have decided, and then they take these messages to the people. And I think we need a counter narrative about people, you know, making evaluation rational enough and try to use their vote to change, because that is the theory of democracy.
Thank you very much, Professor Tairu Jega and Professor Sam Egu. Viewers, this program was brought to you by the Working Group on Peace Building and Good Governance and the United States Institute of Peace, where we have done what I could call the PS 101 of Nigerian political parties and describe the challenges they pose, but we've also pointed to directions in which they can address these challenges and make sure that in spite of the limitations of our political parties, we still have an election that brings out the best possible candidates on offer. Thank you and see you next time.